Yep, that's good. All right. It's exciting to see that happen, isn't it?
Amen.
We look at that and we say, well, how can we have more of this? I want you to open with me to John chapter 17. We're going to start a new series this week. I'm calling this, by the way, round one of the church versus the world. John chapter 17. To set the stage for you, Jesus here, he's praying with his disciples. He's about to be captured. An armed mob has formed. He's going to go into the Garden of Gethsemane. He's praying with his disciples like this final time in a few chapters here in John. So John chapter 17, starting verse 14. And we'll kind of stay in this section here through the next few weeks. Jesus prays and he says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them. For they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. Now, just to recap here, Jesus, he's praying for his disciples, and it's interesting. He doesn't pray like, God, give us traveling mercies. You consider an armed mob is about to attack them. He doesn't say, God, protect the disciples from the same fate that's about to happen to me, because everybody he's praying for dies a horrible, horrible death. The hands of the same kind of people. Instead, he has this dialogue with God about how the disciples are going to be relating to the world. And this is a very familiar passage for a lot of people in the church. There's a clothing line, not of this world, N-O-T-W. You may have heard the phrase, we're in the world, but not of the world. And that's just what we're going to be talking about the next few weeks. I think it's really important for us to understand what that means and how we can live it out. So to recap the things Jesus is saying here, he's like, look, I am separate from the world. Jesus came into the world as the creator. He was separate from all the sinful, evil things. And that's kind of what he's talking about, the world outside of him. And he says, by your nature, as my followers, you're kind of standing with me. You're separate. You're not of the world, just in the same way I'm not a part of it. And he says, and the world hates you because of that. Now, a lot of times when we use the phrase like we're to be in the world but not of the world, our focus tends to be on the separation part. But if you look at the words Jesus and the grammar there, the focus and what he's commanding the disciples to do is not be separate. He's saying, you're separate from the world just by your nature. You follow me, you're separate from the world's going to hate you. What I'm telling you to do is to go into the world that hates you. And he says, and he specifically tells them, he's like, look, I just want you to know. And maybe they thought about this later, after the guards take him and kill him and after they're getting killed. He says, I want you to know I'm not praying for God to remove you. I'm not praying after this. I'm praying for this. I'm not praying that you be taken out of danger. I'm sending you into it in the same way that I was sent into it. Why? Jesus, of course, models this perfectly. In the book of Luke, chapter 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. Again, you ask most people in America to tell you a few things about Jesus, especially people outside the church. That's something they're very aware of. This whole concept that Jesus ate with sinners. Jesus hung out with the wrong crowd, you might say. And what I like here is this setting. In other situations, when he calls Matthew, the tax collector, when he calls him, he eats with him. But here in this setting, it isn't just eating. They're gathering around to hear Jesus. And he's not doing like a stand-up comedy routine. They're gathering around to hear Jesus teach. What is Jesus saying? I mean, you look at the rest of the Gospels, and it's not like Jesus is talking, he's got like prostitutes and tax collectors coming in and talking. It's not like Jesus is avoiding the areas of theft and sexual morality. And yet, even so, those people are coming to hear him talk. Sometimes in the church, we almost believe that isn't possible. That we can both speak the truth and have people drawn to the love of God that they see in us. And here's how I know that we don't believe this to be really possible. We tend to do one of two things. Either we shut up about it, and we don't say things that are true for fear of offending people. You ever done that? You're around someone, and maybe you're having a conversation, or somebody asks you like flat out about something, and our immediate reaction is to not say what we know to be true. For fear of, and really the fear there is that the only way this is going to end is badly. All right, so that's a lot of people. Other people, though, every single conversation they have ends badly. Right? Maybe you've worked with the boss I mentioned, who is an atheist that I worked for. It was kind of a rough road for me because the guy before me, he described it, was one of those pushy Christians who also stole from him. That didn't help, but that's another story. But some people, they go around and you almost cringe, to allow them into your circle of friends. I'll be honest with you, I have a lot of non-Christian friends on Facebook, and there are some people, if a conversation gets started, I'm just like, oh, I don't know what they're going to say. Because every conversation they have with somebody, they just throw their opinions out there, and then they're surprised at, the way they deliver it, that all of a sudden, people are upset and hurt by what they said. And they don't believe this is possible because in their mindset, if I'm speaking the truth, people are going to be mad. All the time. Both of those are false. If you're always keeping your mouth shut for fear that people will guaranteed be offended, or if you're always offending people, Jesus spoke the truth to those people, and they came and gathered around him. I used to eat lunch with students in a public high school. They let me come in. And it was one of those things where, I'm sure legally, kind of towing the line there a little bit. The principal allowed me to come in, and I knew that it was one of those situations, I'm here as long as I can be here. And so I'm sitting down, and I sit down at a table with some students, and I know one or two of them, we're just talking about stuff. And in the course of conversation, two of them mentioned that coming out as gay to their parents ended really badly. Their parents had just rejected them, and the role of faith came into this. And one of the other students, and this is really quick, one of the other students tells them, wait, I thought those people weren't supposed to pray to God. And again, you feel the basic hostility that many people outside the church feel from us. And then they turn to me. Pastor Aaron, what do you think? I'm in a public school. Images of the ACLU flashing before my eyes. I'm fully expecting okay, this is my last lunch here. I mean, what? And I'll admit it myself. I was like, this can only end badly, and I've only got 5 minutes before the bell rings. And so I say one of those Nehemiah prayers, Lord help. And I launch into a 5-minute, here's as best I can, and explain to you what the Bible has to say about this. And I told him the truth. And later on, we will do a series on sexuality, great, and I'll tell you kind of what I told them. But just at the end of the conversation, it was one of those, I just stopped talking right in time for the bell to ring, and the students got up and they left. And I'm like, oh. One of the students who had come out to his dad and been rejected, he came back to me, and just kind of this awkward, he reached out his hand and he said, I just wanted to thank you. Kind of like, okay, talk to you later. And it blew my mind because I figured as I told him the truth, that the only possible way for it to be received was rejection and hostility. So I'm telling you that it is possible for us to have these kinds of situations in our lives. Where people who know where we stand, even on issues, sins they have in their life. And here's a good rule of thumb. You can tell if you're doing it correctly, if you're really modeling the love of Jesus, if you can have somebody who's living in some kind of sin, and they know where you stand, and they're still willing to eat dinner at your house. It's possible. It's possible, and that's what Jesus was doing. You can imagine the reaction of the people around him. So Jesus is teaching, right, and all these deplorables are gathered around him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners, eats with them." Now again, we talked about last week, and kind of ironic here, they're calling Jesus out for giving a warm welcome to sinners. Remember Simon not welcoming. So remember also the Pharisees, their entire mindset of holiness, of separation and devotion to God was, I want to be as far away as possible from sin and people who commit it. So they tried to create as much separation between themselves and dirty, nasty, icky, sinful people as possible. Like walk on the other side of the road when they see you coming. Separation. So look at Jesus, and it's scandalous. The Essenes were another group at that time. They took what the Pharisees did to another level. They moved out of Jerusalem. They're like, I can't even live here. Oh, I can't even live here. I'm going to go. And they moved to the middle of the desert, right, to try and just separate themselves from all those bad people. I've seen churches like that. I used to, in North Carolina, all the way out on the coast, any state church function, like 4-hour drive to the middle of the state. And I would pass every time, and I never stopped and took a picture. I wish I did. A church on the side of the road, surrounded by barbed wire. Yeah! I couldn't, look close enough to see if they had, a visitor welcome sign on the front door. But, that would have been a good picture, just framed with the barbed wire fence. I'm sure there was a story there, maybe repeated robberies or something. But still, the message that sends. Invite somebody to church, the passcode at the gate. Right? Never mind the guard dogs. And sometimes churches, though, we do that unintentionally. I'm sure that church did not intend to send that kind of a message to the people who had come there. Did you hear what Larry said as he came into our church? Oh, I'm a proud pastor for you guys. That he said that he came in and he felt that it didn't matter who he was or where he was from. I mean, how many Jews from New York City do we have visiting here in Thayer, Missouri? Felt that welcoming presence. So good job. So Jesus, remember as he prayed, he says, just so you guys know, I'm not asking God to take you out of this world. I'm sending you into it. I'm not asking, and again, imagine the disciples as they grew up around Pharisees, right? Their view of what a really righteous man of God would do, possibly influenced by that. And so Jesus says, I think, as he prays with them there in John 17, he's really talking about the Pharisees and their mindset. He says, I'm not praying that you would do like the Essenes or the Pharisees. Now tell us, church, total separation from evil people is impossible. Stop trying. We want to live in this Christian bubble. Only listen, to Christian music, only send our kids to Christian schools, only have Christian friends, and wear Christian sandals. They have that, right? Slap a cross on anything and sell it to us. The book of 1 Corinthians, and I think this is a really interesting passage. I'm only going to read you like one sentence, and just trust me, we are going to get the rest of the context next week. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, he's writing to a church, and what he's writing to them about here is actually a situation where he was telling them to remove somebody from the church. So the context here is he's telling them there's somebody in your church, and it's a case of gross sexual immorality. Yeah, I think the guy was sleeping with his stepmom. He's like, you can't have this in the church. And so in the middle of that, though, he says this, in the middle of that conversation about them removing this guy from the church. He says, I want to be clear. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the people of this world. Hear me, church. He says, I don't want you to worry about the people that you pass on the street. He just lists off a couple things here. Those people who are immoral, or the greedy, or the swindlers, or the idolaters. He says, in that case, you would have to leave this world. So again, he says, if your mindset is avoiding all evil people, just go to Mars. You can't do it. Neither are we commanded to. Again, Jesus said, I'm not taking you out of the world. I'm sending you into it. And our tendency is to create that separation from people who are outsiders. And there's a lot of this in our culture right now, and it's really disturbing to me, this us versus them mentality. There's division everywhere that we look. And so as the church, we can tend to look at people who we associate with as the world, as the enemy, as people who are threatening to us. And you know what Jesus said? That is true. They hate you. Go to them anyways. So here he responds to the Pharisees. So remember, sinners come, eager to hear him teach. The Pharisees are upset. And Jesus is like, let me tell you a story, Pharisees. It's back in Luke 15. Then Jesus told them this parable. And it's more than just a passive thing, by the way, that we sit through. It's not like, oh, I've got to be in the world. Like, oh, I just got to endure one more day with these people at work. I don't know about your workplace. Oh, I don't like these people. You know, I just got to deal with. No. Listen to how Jesus describes what he means when he says, I am sending you into the world. Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? See, the Pharisees, they looked at those people as like a sinful contagion, an infection to be avoided. Jesus looked at them as something to be redeemed. Now, shepherds don't generally just like leave their flock somewhere and go wander around the country. There's a purpose to this. And if we face a world that is basically hostile to us, and if it is easier and more comfortable for us to be around people who don't cuss every other word out of their mouths, why then are we going out and seeking out these people? Jesus says, the good shepherd will leave the rest of his flock and find the wandering one. So why didn't Jesus pray for us to be removed from the sinful world? Because it's full of sinful people that he wants to save. And that's why he sends us out. But some churches, they take the approach of a shepherd who has a sheep run off and then sits with the other 99, hugging them in as tight as he can and waiting for that lost sheep. They know where to find us. Some churches over time, they have another sheep leave and another sheep. And still they sit and they say, well, you know, we're just going to try and hold on as tightly to what we have here and try not to lose anybody else. And it's scary out there. There's lions and bears. I try And pastors, I know it can do the same thing. I try and spend as much time as I can out there. Like, I have a hard time, just like sitting alone here in the church, in the basement office that's now like partially film studio. Like, if I'm going to do services, like I go to McDonald's, and I sit there, and it just gives me the chance to have that talk with somebody else. I try and go to football games and stuff, and so I was at a football game, and I went and I recognized somebody I knew who's openly gay, and I sat down with them, and I just started talking with them, and I think they gave almost a little bit of a double take. Like, I'd met them before, and talked to them, and like, oh, okay, pastor's sitting next to me. Everybody gets a little bit. And I'll be honest with you, like, at one point there was that little bit of a thought in my mind, though. What would people think? Would people, this is a small town, people look, what, and I don't know, maybe people did look at this and say, what is that pastor doing? Sitting with that person. Doesn't he know who they are? To them, my answer would be yes. And that is why I am sitting with this person. Let that be our mindset. To seek out those who are lost. To eat with them. And again, Jesus didn't just go out and hang out with the wrong crowd because they were fun to hang out with. He didn't just go out and play frisbee golf with Matthew and his friends. He went out with a very specific purpose. I'm not saying that you have to go out and find that coworker who's always cussing or something and corner them in the break room at work and share the gospel with them every time you talk with them. But Jesus describes his mindset. He says, you want to understand what I'm doing here. I care more about reaching this person than the other people who are already in the fold. That's what I'm doing here. And he goes on to describe the celebration. And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. So again, I think that, I think of churches, and it is appropriate, by the way, it is appropriate to have a high level of excitement over what God has been doing here in the church. Multiple people, this year, coming to know Jesus for the first time in their lives. That is very good to be excited about. Because what happens when we don't see that? You're sitting there with the flock, and maybe you look at pictures, and our flock used to be 99. Now it's 79, 49, a few dozen. And when a church goes for so long, we forget that there are sheep out there. Like we're we're certainly aware that we have relatives who don't know the Lord, that we have coworkers who don't know them, but the possibility of those people being reached, we lose faith. Now, Larry is kind of an interesting example because that was an easy one. God did all the work. Right? You know how rare it is for somebody to just walk in, and you heard his story. All the work, God had done that and brought him to the point. He walked through the doors of this church ready. We didn't go do some outreach program or, go, do some, special thing out there in the community. He came to us. That doesn't usually happen. All right, so that's not a good evangelism strategy for a church, is just sit around and look at the door. So I appreciate you as a church, like understanding that about me, that I'm spending, this time out there in the community, doing the substitute teaching, doing that stuff so that I'm in contact with people who don't know Jesus. And I appreciate that about this church. And again, I'm talking, about Celebrate Recovery and this addiction ministry. Boy, we're going after some sheep. All right? We're going after the addicts, and it kills me because I wonder if some Christians in this community, if we have allowed ourselves to have that view of addicts. Separation, don't let them come around here. But I tell you, I want it to be more than just what your pastor does or more than just some program that the church does. You have opportunity. I'm not saying that you go around and think of the nastiest person you know in your circle of friends and make them your BFF. But I am saying that we have to be willing as Christians. Like I said, I worked on a construction crew. You're going to have people cuss around you. All right? And if you're going to reach lost people, you got to learn to just love them anyways. People with rough edges,